Kia ora, haere mai, welcome back. This time we're going to be looking at the supply curve, the individual firm supply curve and then the market supply curve, and then looking at changes in that supply curve, whether movements along or shifts, and then we're going to look at price elasticity of supply. So let's go. Other names for sellers in the market are, of course, business, very familiar, firms and suppliers. The term we tend to use most is supplier or firm. Now the supply curve is the seller or producer's curve. And we're going to be looking firstly at changes in supply, whether caused by price, movements along the supply curve, very much like the demand curve analysis, and non-price factors causing shifts in the supply curve. So let's look at the supply curve, and as we can see, it's upward sloping, unlike the demand curve, which was downward sloping. Upward sloping indicates that as the price increases, there will be an increase in quantity supply. And of course, what we're stating is the law of supply. Normally, under normal circumstances, if the price increases, quantity supplied will increase, ceteris paribus. And of course, this will be always true, providing any other non-price factors that could affect supply do not change. Note the relationship between the variables, price and quantity supplied, is positive. If price increases, then quantity supplied will increase. If price decreases, then quantity supplied will decrease. Now, a simple analysis or explanation: at a higher price, the producer is willing to supply more because they'll get more revenue. So if you look here, the original price, P times Q, is total revenue. If the price goes up, they'll want to sell more. They'll increase to Q dash, so they get more revenue. So looking at our supply schedule for an individual supplier, Mr. Smith Limited, you can see the law of supply working here. As the price goes up, quantity supplied increases. We have an upward sloping supply curve. Remember also that when you're plotting these graphs in tests and exams, they usually, 2 marks are usually allocated. One for the labeling, price, quantity, supply curve labeled S, and one for correct scaling to represent the figures correctly. Now the market supply schedule and curve is made up of all the individual suppliers, and in this example here we have 3 producers in the market: Smith, Jones and Ford. So at a price of 50,000 we can see that we have Smith willing to supply 150, Jones 120 and Ford 140. So we simply horizontally sum or add across at that price to get the market demand. So we can see as the points are plotted, the main difference is going to be in it's upward sloping of course, but the main difference is going to be in the quantities supplied, because we're talking about all the quantity supplied at each price. So what things will cause a change in supply? Primarily a change in price. If the price decreases, there'll be a movement down the supply curve and quantity supplied will decrease. If price increases to P2, there'll be a movement up the supply curve, described as an increase in quantity supplied. Remember, quantity supplied is important using the terminology because that indicates the cause, which is a price change. But there are other things that cause changes in supply. These are non-price factors, and this assumes that ceteris paribus no longer holds. Remember, ceteris paribus assumes that nothing else that can affect supply changes when the price changes. Ceteris paribus, but of course the most important non-price factor when we deal with supply, and this is good news, is there really is only one thing that happens most often, and that's a change in costs of production. Change in costs are the most common reason for shifts in the supply curve. Now there's a special case known as the price of related goods. And related goods, as you can see there in red, are goods that use the same resources. For example, a farmer uses land to produce, say, lambs and grow trees. So the related good then are the trees and the lambs, because they use the same resource. We'll look at that a little bit later. Changes in costs of production lead to a shift in the supply curve. The best way to remember it, costs up, supply curve shifts to the left. Cost down, supply curve shifts to the right. Producers want to produce more. Now, there are also government interventions in the market that can affect the cost of production, and most often when the government does something, costs will rise. But in our first example, subsidies are actually a payment from the government to the business to lower the costs of production so that more will be produced of that good. So the supply curve will actually shift to the right because costs have decreased for the business. Remember that the government's paying some of those costs. The opposite effect is an indirect tax. The most common one in New Zealand is the Goods and Services Tax, GST. Currently 15% of every item produced and sold, the government receives 15%, or 15 cents of every dollar. So if that was to increase, cost to the business would increase, and so the supply curve would shift to the left. The third example of government intervention, when the government makes rules or regulations about how the business operates. For example, restaurants have to be very hygienic and clean. They have to reach a certain standard that costs money to get there. They have to have safety requirements, exit doors, fireproof doors, etc. So all those add to costs. So government regulations increase costs. Therefore, the supply curve will shift to the left. So running through them, these examples here, if the government decreases GST on tractors, so the supply of tractors will increase because the costs have decreased for the producers of tractors, so the supply curve will shift to the right. If the price of tractor parts, the things that are actually used to make the tractor, the tyres or the motor or whatever, if those costs, those tractor parts increase in price, costs have increased, so the supply curve will decrease and the supply curve will rather shift to the left. If new technology increases the productivity, the rate of production of tractors, the supply of tractors will increase, so the supply curve will shift to the right. Some more examples. See the one on the bottom is already done for you. Decrease in GST on tractors, so cost down, supply increases. An increase in the price of tractors, we're going to get a movement up the curve, following the law of supply. The next one, a law is passed making it compulsory for all tractors to have safety cages. One of the problems in New Zealand is that the land is very uneven, undulating, we say, and so tractors are often on slopes and they can easily tip over and of course crush the driver. And so many tractors now have to have, by law, it's compulsory to have safety cages, but that increases the cost of producing the tractor, so the supply curve will shift to the left. And lastly, if the factory workers where the tractors are being produced receive higher wages, wages that are cost to that business. Costs rise, so supply curve will shift to the left. Supply of BP petrol. If the price of BP petrol decreases, that means there will be a movement down the curve. The government increases tax on petrol, the cost of producing petrol goes up, so the supply will decrease. The price of cars decreases. Now this one's a bit trickier, because if the price of cars increase, we have to ask, well, what's the relationship between petrol and cars? Well, they're complements. So really this is asking you to look first at the change in demand. So if this means that the price of cars goes up, less people will buy cars, so the demand curve will shift down to the left, causing a decrease in demand for petrol. So the price of petrol will fall because of the fall in demand. And the last one, hurricanes in oil-producing states disrupt petrol supplies, which means basically there'll be less oil available, and so petrol supplies will decrease. This is again much the same. New technology for refining oil into petrol is developed. Better technology, cost of production falls, supply shifts to the right. A new war in the Middle East breaks out. Basically, it's going to disrupt oil supplies. Costs will rise of getting that oil out, and so supply curve will shift left. Government increases a tax on petrol, costs rise, and so supply shifts left. Many more people in New Zealand decide to bike to work, so again you're thinking about demand first, because petrol goes with cars, and so biking to work is really a substitute for using the car. So this one you have to imagine the demand for petrol decreasing, so the price will fall. Have a look at this presentation by Stephen King from Monash University. Again, very detailed and gives good insight into looking at the market, the supply curve from the point of view of opportunity cost. Now, the special case we want to look at is this related good example where you've got two goods using the same resources. How will the price of one changing, say due to an increase in demand, affect the supply of the other good that uses the same resource? Here we have a market gardener, produces vegetables and flowers, and he uses half his land for vegetables and half for flowers. But then the demand for flowers increases. So he's going to get more revenue, he's going to get a higher price if he produces more flowers. So if the demand for flowers increases, the price of flowers will increase. And that means if he can produce more, increased quantity supplied, he'll get more revenue, so he wants to. So what he has to do though, because he's got a limited amount of land, he has to take some of the land that was used to produce vegetables to now produce more flowers. And this means that his supply of vegetables must decrease because he's got less land to produce the vegetables. He's chosen to use his land, more of his land, to produce flowers because it's relatively more profitable. So here we can see the price of flowers rising actually causes the supply of vegetables to decrease when the goods are related. So the demand for flowers increases, causing the price of flowers to increase, Following the law of supply, the market gardener will increase the quantity supplied of flowers by planting out more of his land, which is in fixed supply, and flowers. However, the gardener now has less land for the production of vegetables. But this is not a problem because vegetables are now relatively less profitable to grow. Therefore, the gardener will decrease the supply of vegetables, which causes the supply curve of vegetables to shift to the left. Right, in this last part of this section, we're going to look at price elasticity of supply, and very much like the definition for price elasticity of demand, it measures the responsiveness of quantity supplied to changes in price. Formula, familiar, percentage change formula. We compare the percentage change of price, which causes a percentage change in quantity supplied. Or we use the midpoint formula, which we prefer because it's a little bit more accurate. And again, if the change in quantity is proportionally greater than the change in price, then we say we have price elastic response. If it's equal to 1, then we say it's unitary, and if it's less than 1, then we say it's inelastic. Now, a new feature is also to look at how economists divide time. In economics, supply is divided into 3 time periods. The momentary time period is represented by the vertical supply curve S1, and the inelastic supply curve S2 represents the short run time period, and finally S3, much more elastic looking supply curve, represents the long run supply curve. So let's look at some of the details of these 3 time periods. The momentary time period is the period right now, if you like, in real terms, the moment we're in. And we say, at the moment, at this particular moment, all resources or inputs are fixed in supply. Therefore, even if the price increases and the producer wants to increase quantity supplied, he can't, because the inputs that he needs are not available. So we say that quantity supplied in the momentary time period is equal to 0. Price goes up, quantity supplied cannot respond to the price increase. Secondly, the short run. The short run, the definition is not a short period of time necessarily. It is at least one of the inputs or resources that the business needs, the firm needs, is unavailable. Therefore, if the price increases, the producer can respond. He can increase quantity supplied, but only by a small amount relative to the change in price, because some of the resources needed are not available. So the supply curve is relatively inelastic. So when the price rises significantly, quantity supplied can respond, but by not a great deal. Now, in the long run, all the inputs or resources are available. Therefore, if the price increases, the producer can easily increase quantity supplied, can easily respond, and by a large amount, of course, and this is because all those resources are available that he needs. So the supply curve is relatively elastic. So a small change in price, a large increase in quantity supplied. So the coefficient is greater than 1. Now these are just a series of exercises to help you become more familiar with the concept of availability of resources and price elasticity of supply. So if resources are readily available, easily gotten, producers can easily increased quantity supplied, more elastic. The mobility of resources. Now we look at mobility in two ways. Occupationally, so for a worker, can they change from one job, say being a teacher, to working in a bank, to another? If labour can easily be trained to produce other goods and services, supply will be much more elastic. If a building can easily be converted to use or produce another good, then the supply will be more elastic. If ACG could use this building for something else other than education, you'd say it's occupationally mobile, but it's certainly not geographically mobile. Labour, on the other hand, can be fairly mobile, can move from place to place geographically, and if it can move, well, it's going to be more elastic, for supply can respond more easily because workers will come. But if workers don't want to move away from friends and family to other regions where the lifestyle, leisure, activity, weather is not as good, then supply will be less elastic. The ease of which production can be increased or decreased, in other words, price elasticity of supply, depends on the level of employment in a region or economy. If it's high, everyone has a job, and so it's going to be much harder to attract new workers or workers who have already got a job to come and work for you. So supply will be less elastic. How easy it is to enter in and start producing in a market or industry. If there's strong barriers to enter and start producing, for example, barriers like setting up, costs, or shortages of suitable factory space or land, then supply will be less elastic. Government regulations and legal restrictions can also make it difficult to set up, thus making supply less elastic. Availability of stock. If it's easy to store the good and therefore make it available when, say, for example, demand increases for that product, supply will be much more elastic. If the amount of spare capacity in the industry, already mentioned, if workers, factories, office space and machines are readily available, then of course businesses can get those inputs and supply will be more elastic. One final point to note is that price elasticity of supply in terms of time is going to be different for the type of good. Each good has a different time period in terms of short and long run. Pine trees take over 30 years to be ready to harvest. Lambs are ready for slaughter in less than 1 year. Coke can be manufactured very quickly, and once the factory is ready to go, it can easily be stored. So the time to increase quantity supply will be very, very short compared to sheep or tree production. So we've come to the end of our unit, and so we'll be completing the different parts to it, and of course workbook exercises and a summary. See you later.